Baby, here I go, start the show. Beat on my heart, now about to explode. I'm about to explode. Feel good, what I'm feeling.
Good evening, everyone, and happy Friday Eve. Welcome back to this episode of Ignite Your True Self. I am Ericka Sallee, your host for this show. And if you are just coming in for the first time, let me take this opportunity to welcome you to the show. I get excited, and it's hard to believe that it's just been 1 week since I went on a little bit of a one-day hiatus. I know that this is prom season, it's graduation season, and I just want to give a shout out to all of the grads for the class of 2023, for all who are enjoying their prom season. It's so exciting to see all of the beautiful gowns and the handsome gentlemen who are enjoying prom. I think about how just a few years ago, some of our kids didn't have the opportunity to experience something that I know is special to many, many families. And so wanting to give a shout out to my niece, Maya, who I was celebrating last week, which is why I was not here for Ignite Your True Self. Wanted to send her off to her senior prom, and she looked absolutely gorgeous. The belle of the ball, if I must say. And so here we are back for another week and another episode. And so if you are here for the first time, I think I was getting ready to start that a little while ago before I started talking about prom and graduation season, but it's very easy to get into that topic because that's the time that we're in. But let me take this opportunity to introduce myself. I am a speaker, self-help author, and transformation success coach, owner of True Synergy. And as a result of my personal coaching and professional development programs, I help women and organizations to figure out what is it that stands in the way. What stops you every single time you decide that you want to move forward and you say, no, I can't do it. Or when you do take a step, then you stop for a moment. What is that about? And so I get excited about sharing and discovering and unlocking what those barriers may be, because then I get to give you the strategies to help you move beyond those barriers to figure out what your next looks like, your best version, your true self, your true synergy. And so you might say, well, what does that really mean? It really means the essence of who you were created to be. I do believe that we were all created with a gift or several gifts, and it is our responsibility to give those gifts to the world. It is also our responsibility. It's actually our right to live joyfully, prosperous, fulfilled, happy, all the things that make us feel like we are going through this life that we're living in an excited way, and we're doing it purposefully, right? And it also means that we are taking care of ourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. That is your true synergy. And so Ignite Your True Self is one of those opportunities where I get to spend a few moments with you on Thursday evenings to share some aha moments. Each week there is a topic that I'm hoping you do get an aha moment from, so that you can figure out how to take this little spark and then keep moving forward to whatever next looks like for you. And so I do want to take this opportunity to get us ready for the conversation for tonight. But before I do that, I do want to acknowledge the fact that it is indeed Pride Month. Today is June 1st. And so the whole entire month kicks off the celebration for the LGBTQ plus community. And so I just wanted to read this to you. I thought this was a great way to kind of sum up what this month really means to so many people, and rightfully so. Every June in the United States and in locations around the world, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender communities join forces for Pride Month, a month-long celebration of self-affirmation, love, diversity, dignity, equality. Let me read those two again. Dignity, equality, acceptance, and increased visibility for said communities. Oh, and let's not forget about the unapologetic pride that comes with being true to oneself. That's at the very heart of Pride Month. This very clear description was taken from bboutique.co. I want to credit the source for this information. And so when I looked at that, I was like, how fitting and how clear of an explanation is that? And let me just go back and just read a couple of keywords. Self-affirmation, love, diversity, dignity, equality, acceptance, and increased visibility. Even in the times that we're living in, when there are individuals, where there are groups, there are states, there are communities who would try to butcher everything that I just read as a description for why Pride Month is a celebration. Okay, so that's a topic all on its own. Not going to go too far down into that conversation, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we are indeed celebrating Pride Month. And listen, there is a lot to be celebrated in the community. So I just wanted to mention that. I also want to say, which is not listed here in this particular description, but there is also an opportunity for us to be allies to the community. So whether you know someone who is in the community, whether there's something that you can do to encourage, to support, to be a part of the mission, then I encourage you and all of us, to find a way to do just that. So as we are watching tonight's show, I do want to also remind you to use the hashtag Ignite Your True Self, which you see scrolling at the bottom of your screen. So as I share the topic for tonight, if there's something that resonates with you, if there's something that you want to share out to your community, whether you're watching on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or LinkedIn, not Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. Instagram has yet to be in the space on this platform, but okay. Then I do want you to use the hashtag Ignite Your True Self, because there may be something that you hear in this conversation that could resonate with those that you are connected to. And so for those of you who are joining me live, I do appreciate you. For those of you who will come in later to see the replay, I do want you to hashtag replay and also share your ahas that you hear in the conversation. And again, hashtag Ignite Your True Self. So let's get into the topic for tonight. It's interesting because I've been thinking about this topic, oh gosh, probably for a few weeks now. And I didn't really realize that it was going to be a topic for this show until probably about maybe 5 hours ago. Because I have a lineup of topics. And when I started thinking about this, I really wanted to kind of switch things around and share this tonight, because this is an actual real world experience that I have been having recently. And I thought, I wonder if there's anybody else out there who needs to know these ahas that I just discovered on this topic. And so tonight I want to share some thoughts around closure. Closure. Now, this is closure as it relates to relationships, but I want you to think about how it pertains to what's happening in your space. So you might be able to relate this very clearly to relationships, because I think on the broad scale, we all can kind of attest to the content that I'm going to share tonight from a relationship standpoint. But you might be dealing with something else in your space right now, whether it's maybe with your job or something else that you can relate this topic of closure to. So I want you to figure out where it fits for you. If it fits along the relationship line, great. If there's something else that you discover, that's even better, because there's a personal aha that you get to connect with in a different way. And if that is the case, then I do encourage you to share that in the comments, right? Because I'm speaking of it from one perspective, but if you have another perspective to share that is equally applicable, then by all means do share a comment about that. So here's the thing. One of the things that I know to be true, and any person who is sharing the human experience can relate to this, is that we transition to different stages of relationships over the course of our lives. And sometimes we have a tendency to hold on to parts of those relationships when we need to get to a place of closure. And this doesn't necessarily mean that well, let me just kind of go through the explanation of what I mean by closure. And I think what I was getting ready to say will become a little bit clearer. So when you think about this conversation, this topic tonight, as it relates to igniting your true self. So remember, this show and the conversation that I have in a number of different spaces, whether it's with friends, with family, with clients, is all about what's the thing that's standing in your way? What's the thing that's stopping you from being that best version? And sometimes our connection to people and how those relationships morph and change over a period of time can be a barrier for us. And so the problem is that closure may not necessarily show up in the way that we expect it to. And if we don't accept it for what it is, then it may keep us from moving forward. It may keep us from being joyful. It may keep us from being happy. It may keep us from being free. And so that's what this topic tonight is all about. So typically, when I share the topic, I'm giving you specific tips. Tonight, what I want to do is I want to break this thing called closure down into 4 types of closure. And at the end of the conversation around what the distinction is between the 4, then I have one specific tip that is applicable across all 4 types. Okay. So if you've been following me, if you've been watching the show since we started in January, you know that each show I give tips. So tonight I'm going to give the 4 types of closure, and then I'm going to share one tip at the end of the conversation. So let me start with the first type of closure. The first type of closure is called what I'm calling. Now, these are types that I've defined based on the landscape of things that have been happening over the course of my life for a little bit of time. And I'll give you some specific examples as applicable. So the first type of closure is what I call self-closure. It's self-closure. This is the kind of closure where you might not really have the opportunity to discuss a situation or something that's happening with a specific person or group of people. And you have to come to terms with the relationship change on your own. Okay, let me say that again. It's a type of closure where you're basically dealing with it on your own. You may not have the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with somebody or a group of people. And that could be for a number of different reasons. It might be that either you choose not to, or the other person chooses not to. Maybe there's distance that's in the way. Maybe there's other circumstances. Every time you try to have a conversation, every time you try to make the time, something happens, something comes up. And so you get to a point where you're like, okay, this is something that I have to deal with on my own. And so what that means is you're kind of in a space assessing the situation, assessing the person, whatever the history is associated. And you say to yourself, okay, there's something in this space that feels like it needs to come to an end. And if I don't have the opportunity to work through it with the other people or the other parties, then I have to deal with this on my own. Okay, that's self-closure. So you might say, well, how do I deal with self-closure on my own if I don't have the opportunity to have a conversation with another person about something? Then how do I do that? So there's a couple ways that I would say, and that is you could journal it, right? Sometimes you just have to get thoughts out of your head. And I know in my journal, there are times when I might just write words, or I might just, be very quick or very short. Other times I may write extensively just to kind of get all my thoughts out. So when you are in a place where self-closure is the option that you have, to release something or release yourself from a space of another person or another group of people for whatever reason, then journaling might be the way to do that. Another way might be to engage an unrelated party. So whether that's a friend or a family member that has absolutely nothing to do with the person or the situation, whether it's a professional like a therapist or someone like that, that's kind of how you get into that self-closure space. It is the opportunity to release something if you don't have the chance to release it with the person or the people that are involved. Okay. So that is what I'm calling self closure. The second type of closure is what I'm calling one directional closure. One directional closure. This is the type of closure um, when you do have the opportunity to discuss a situation with another person or people, and you feel like there's still something that's unresolved, right? So either you have a conversation with another person and maybe you don't get the response that you thought you would get, or maybe you kind of get some avoidance on certain things. And so one directional closure means you're bringing it up, you're having a conversation, you're having a discussion, and there's little to no reciprocation in the response back. Or, well, let me get back to you, or let me think about it. And you're like, okay, here I put it out there. And so now what? So, really, what you're doing is you are releasing, you are sharing, you are bringing specific things to light, but the other side of it is not coming back to you to tell you one way or the other what implications there are, what happens next, anything like that. But you've had the opportunity to release. Okay. So that's one directional closure. That's type number 2. Type number 3 is what I call open-ended closure. Open-ended closure. So open-ended closure is when you have the opportunity to discuss a situation with another party, group of people, whatever the relationship dynamic is. And it appears as if there is a willingness to listen, right? The other person is reciprocating, sharing with you. You're kind of having this dialogue, and it's like, okay, I hear you, you hear me. We're kind of coming together. We're having this conversation. We seem like we're on the same page with whatever is going on in the space. But you don't really see any change or logical path forward, or you're kind of getting mixed signals. Okay. Even though you might be having a conversation, you might hear one thing being said, but then afterward, you're like, okay, but is there anything that's different? Have I seen any change? It sounded like we had a path forward, but anything after that, the behavior doesn't seem to align with that. So I'm calling that open-ended closure because even though you're coming together to have a conversation, there still feels like there's something that's not resolved. There's still this place where you might be saying, I don't really know, did what just happened? So let me give you an example. I've been very open about the fact that I don't even know if I would call this a dating world, but I have been meeting new people. Um, and so, one situation, there was a connection that I had with someone, and the someone seemed to have a connection with me, right? And so we just get to this point where you kind of feel like, okay, we're on this roll, but now something has changed, something different has happened. And so let's just figure out what this is, especially if you're on a path and you kind of feel like, okay, you got a vibe, you're having a good time, and then something changes. And so when you come together and you have a conversation, in this case, we're having a conversation, kind of feeling like, okay, I hear you. This is kind of what I'm seeing. This is how this is showing up. And so this dialogue is going well. When the dialogue is over, open-ended closure feels like, okay, we got to an understanding, got to a good place. And so this is how we're going to move forward. But in the moving forward part, there's still something that's missing. There's still something that doesn't add up. There's still something that makes you say, okay, I know we had this conversation, but I don't really see that there's anything that's changed. I don't see that there's anything that's different. I don't see any responses that are showing up in a different way, opposite of what led us to need to have the conversation in the first place. So, yeah, there's still a level of closure that I feel like is not there. Okay. That's open-ended closure. It's like, okay, we talked, we had a conversation, we discussed, but there's still something that makes you feel like something is still amiss. Okay. That's open-ended closure. The last type of closure is what I'm calling complete closure. Complete closure. Complete closure is when you have the opportunity to discuss a situation with a person, a group of people. There's a willingness to listen on both sides, right? Each side has a level of understanding, and either you see that a change has occurred as a result of what the discussion was, or you decide that it's a good break point. And the good break point is we're going to kind of go our separate ways. We're going to be in our own space. We're going to, go after our own things. We're going to focus on our own careers, whatever that looks like. And there's no ambiguity. There's nothing left on the table. You know where this person stands and the person knows where you stand. And there's no like, well, I wonder if, or maybe, right? So if you have those kinds of things, I wonder if, or maybe, or did I hear that right? Or was there something else? That's the open-ended closure, because you're still feeling like you're kind of in this little wishy-washy place. Complete closure says you're not feeling any of that. You've had a discussion, you've gotten the things out that you want to say, or you kind of established a new way of being or resolve some things, and you're in a good place. And a good place doesn't always mean that you will continue the relationship, whether it's an intimate relationship, whether it's a working relationship, however you classify the relationship in these scenarios. Just think of it however that needs to look, right? So if it's going your separate ways from an intimate relationship, going your separate ways from a friendship, going your separate ways from a professional relationship. So you get to decide how it looks for you. And complete closure is the best of the four types to really be engaged in, because at least you feel like, okay, I'm in a place where we've kind of heard each other out, we've ironed it out if there's a sticky point that needs to be discussed, but you feel like it is a healthy place to be. The other three kind of leave you in a place where you have to make some other decisions. Okay. And those other decisions are going to lead me to the tip that I'm going to share in just a few moments on all four of these types. So the tip really is to understand what type of closure you're experiencing, and then get to a level of acceptance, whatever that might be. So I want to read that again. I want to make sure you got that. Is to understand, well, what type of closure is this? Is this the kind of closure where I may not be able to sit down and have this conversation with the person? I might just have to write it out. I might just have to release it from my space. Or if I release it and I don't get a whole lot back, am I going to be okay with that? Or if I have the conversation with someone and then they come back and it's like, okay, we're understanding, we're in this good flow, we seem like we've got a dialogue going back and forth, but then you still feel like, well, wait a minute, something's missing. Is that going to be okay with you? The tip is to really recognize, and you recognize it based on the interaction. You recognize it based on how you are connecting with another person or another group. You will know exactly what type of closure you're dealing with. And so the question is going to be, okay, now that I see what this is about, now that I see how this is flowing, am I going to just be okay with the fact that, okay, I'm trying to communicate, trying to have a conversation. You're not trying to meet me, in a halfway point. So I need to accept the fact that that's really giving me all the information that I need in order to determine what I need to do next. And here's why the tip part is so important. Understanding what type of closure you are experiencing is because, and this is where the connection with igniting your true self comes into play. So when you understand the type of closure you're experiencing, you get to say this, okay, I know this is what it is. It's either, and I'm going to go back and recap the four in just a moment. But based on what I'm seeing, this is the type of closure that I'm experiencing. So now I have to say to myself, so how am I going to continue to engage? And am I going to accept this for what it is so that I can release myself from tying myself up into knots and trying to figure out, well, what's this other person thinking? What's this other person going to do next? Do I continue to stay in that space, or do I say, you know what? I've accepted that this is actually open-ended closure. We've had this conversation, we've discussed, but because I feel like there's something that's still missing, then let me exit out. And that's where the connection to igniting your true self comes into play. That's where the peace comes into play. That's where the boundaries comes into play. That's where managing your energy comes into play. Because wherever you are, in whichever experience, you get to say, okay, I see this for what it is. We need to have some closure on this particular thing. It's either going to be self-directed closure, it's either, or self-closure, it's going to be one directional closure, it's going to be open-minded, or it's going to be complete. So whichever way that is, I get to say to myself, okay, am I in a place where I can say, okay, I see for what it is, I'm gonna walk away, or I'm going to move in another direction, or I have all the closure that I need. Right. So if you realize that you're in a self-closure experience and the only way you can release whatever it is to journal it, have a conversation with someone else outside of it, then that's your release. And saying to yourself, if this is the only way that I'm going to let it go and be free of it so that I can find my best version, so that I can be in my best peace, so that I can be in my best space, then let me just accept it for what it is. Do you understand how that works? So whatever it is, you get to sit down and figure it out and say, okay, now it does not mean, here's a part that we want to be really clear on, is that you might notice that while you might be experiencing a self-closure moment, meaning, okay, I'm just going to release this on my own, what may happen is that it may shift into a one-directional closure, meaning you do have the opportunity to have a conversation with someone. And there may be a little bit of working through and still some trepidation. And then it might move to open-ended closure, where you get to have the conversation and you still might be like, okay, I'm not really sure. And it might stay there, or optimally, it would then move to complete closure. So I say that to demonstrate the fact that the types may change based on how much value each side puts into the relationship. Okay, does that make sense? So it's either going to be one or the other right off the bat, or it may start off as one type and shift into the other four or the three. Okay. And all along the way, this tip is what I want you to hold on to. All along the way, understand where you are, understand what type, observe, be discerning, so that as you are engaging, you're kind of picking up clues to say, okay, we need to bring this thing to closure, but let me just kind of see, well, what kind of closure is this going to be? And recognizing that in the midst, and I want to say it again, you get to make decisions about where you're going to accept. I was going to say settle, but settle has a lot of different connotations. But you get to decide, what am I going to accept? And what I'm going to accept is going to depend on how valuable your own internal peace is, how valuable your energy is, how valuable your time is, and how connected you want to be to this best version of you. If the best version of you says, well, you know what, if I'm okay with self-closure, meaning I can release this on my own, and the energy that I would spend trying to figure out, trying to ask questions, trying to make another phone call, send another text message, whatever, the time that I would spend doing that, I could be putting into something else that's connected to what makes me feel good, what makes me feel purposeful, what makes me feel joyful. So you see how that works. It's a trade-off. Your choice is a trade-off. Your energy is a trade-off. Your time is a trade-off. All the things. And you get to put those hours and that time into something else that is going to be valuable for you, if that means the closure on this side needs to look one of the four ways, right? So I hope that makes sense, but I'm going to go back and just really quickly recap. So again, tonight's conversation is all about closure, the four types of closure. And closure in this instance is as it pertains to your relationships in your personal space, in your professional space. You get to kind of decide. And I know that if you're watching this, there's probably a situation, a circumstance, a person that you can apply these types to. All right. So the first type is self-closure. Self-closure, again, is when you may have to address or deal with a situation with someone and you don't have the opportunity to do that, whether that's, somebody doesn't have time, or somebody's like, okay, I don't want to talk about it, and you say, you know what, I got to release it. So you release it on your own, journaling, having a conversation with someone outside of the situation. That is self-closure, and you deciding that that is going to be what you accept and what you need in order to move on into whatever next looks like for you. The second type is one directional closure, where you do have the opportunity to have a conversation with someone, you have an opportunity to kind of iron some things out, and you don't get the reciprocal communication or feedback back. One directional closure, right? So you had an opportunity to share and you feel like, okay, well, I shared, and so now you're not going to say anything, or you don't want to have a conversation, or what is the thing? You don't want to address this issue. I can recall, and actually this will go to an example on the open-ended closure. So open-ended closure is when you do have an opportunity to come together, but you still feel like there's something that's like, okay, we're walking out, but it's not resolved. So I had a situation some years ago. This was actually in my professional space. And I remember, and I wrote about this actually in my first book, Pathway to Purpose. So in a meeting, there's three of us in the room. And so, there's sort of like a facilitator, if you will. So there's me and there's one of my peers, and we're talking through some things that were going on in terms of like processes and things of that nature. And, I shared my thoughts about how we were doing things. The other person shared thoughts about how we were doing things. And there was sort of like this, okay, we heard each other out. We had a chance to share. And when it was all said and done, the end of the meeting came, and it was like, okay, I don't think we're going to get any further, because, though we were having conversation and I got to share and the other person got to share, and it's like, okay, we're able to kind of put this out there. It got to the point where, how you're in a situation with someone, you're having a conversation, you're having a meeting, and it's like, okay, this is probably a good time for us to stop, because this is not going to get any further. We're not going to make any progress or headway. We're just kind of spinning. So that was an open-ended closure situation. Okay. We both had a chance to talk, but there was really still something left out in the air. So there was really no closure. It was still open-ended. And even though we had a chance to share, we walked out of the room still feeling like, okay, there's some stuff that's still unresolved. And I don't know how this is going to get resolved. And it's definitely not going to get resolved in the climate that we were in that moment. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. And then complete closure is when you do have the opportunity to come together. You have the opportunity to share on both sides, And then you realize, okay, something different is changing. Or you realize, you know what, with all of that out in the air, it's a clean break. We can step away, we can go in our own separate ways and be okay. In all four of the types, you have to understand. I have to understand. We have to understand, what type is this? And knowing what it is, am I in a place of acceptance around it? Because that's the thing that's going to get me to a place of peace. Okay, that's really what that conversation is about. So there's a whole lot more that I could go into, because it really speaks to just the relationship dynamic. However, hopefully this is something where you can look at your current situations and say, oh, you know what? This is the kind of closure. This is what this is. And I have to recognize that, knowing what it is, I in a place of peace around it. And getting to that place of peace around it is what's going to connect me to my better self and the opportunities that I have to create things around me that feel good and are good for me. Okay. So that's the conversation for tonight. I do want to remind you to join me on next week. So this is June. We're getting into the summer months. And at some point, I am going to be on, vacations, hiatus. I know you will be as well, and enjoying your summertime. And so I will be back with you on next week. And I'm not sure yet what the topic is. I'm going to let it be fluid, because as I mentioned earlier in the show, I kind of switched things up. I'm looking at my my topic outline, and I thought, you know what, I want to talk about closure tonight. So I'm going to either go back to the outline and pick up with what is on the schedule for next week, or I'm going to let life and other things dictate the topic for next week. So all I'm going to say is join me on next Thursday at 7:00 p.m. for Ignite Your True Self. And then we will be coming to a little bit of break for the summer months. And I'll talk more about that as we get closer to it. So I'm going to encourage you to stay connected with me. If you have questions specifically related to you, if you say, okay, I got a whole lot of stuff going on in my space, I'm trying to figure out which kind of closure that I'm in and what do I do with it and all the things, or if there's something else pertaining to what's happening in your space and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I move to this next best version? How do I ignite my true self? How do I even know what that is? Well, if you do have those questions, and I do encourage you to visit me at truesynergy.org. If you want to have a conversation just about what's happening in your space, then there is an opportunity for you to contact me to set up a discovery session so we can talk about what that looks like, and more importantly, how I can support you on your journey. I also want to encourage you to follow me on Instagram at TrueSynergy_. You can follow me on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn at Ericka Sallee. My link tree is at the bottom of the screen, which is all the things that are, all of my social media links, all the some other things that are happening right now. You can go check out some videos and things of that nature that are connected to Linktree. But you can also go to my YouTube channel. You can subscribe to the channel, share it out with your community, and you can turn the notification bell on so that you are made aware when new videos are uploaded. So on that note, let me just go back through, make sure that there isn't anything else that I wanted to cover. Also, I want you to stay connected on all of those social media sites, because I will be sharing more information in the weeks to come about the new release of, or my new release. And it is my second book that I'm very proud of. It's all about my journey into being a new divorcee. Not new, now not so new, but new enough. I'm here now, finding joy after the storm. So we've got a lot of good things planned, all kinds of contests, games, Q&As, giveaways, you name it. We're putting it together. And so I do encourage you to stay connected with me. Pre-sales for the book will be starting soon. And then, of course, the official launch and book signing to follow well thereafter. So stay connected with me on all those things related to the book. And if you happen to have missed previous shows, I do encourage you to go back to my YouTube channel. If you click on the live button at the top of the channel, then you will be able to see all the shows that have been conducted since January the 5th, I think it was. And so you can go back and scroll through, find the topics that resonate with you, and check out those particular shows. So listen, on that note, I know the evening hour is still moving along, so I don't want to keep you any longer, but I do want to say thank you for joining me for this edition of Ignite Your True Self. Come on back next week and join me again. I look forward to seeing you then, but until I do, I want you to take care of yourselves and yes, be well.